Well, I have chosen Liszt's arrangements of Schubert. I have played in the past many of Liszt's works and many of Liszt's arrangements, and I believe that the Liszt arrangements of Schubert's Lied are a fantastic example of transcription of vocal music into a pianistic or even orchestral language. Well, these 14 pieces were selected from a certain number of Lieder, Schubert-Liszt Lieder, which were left to record for the set of the complete piano music of Liszt, which Naxos is about to complete. So there was a certain number of Lieder, and among these pieces I chose this 14. It's hard to tell. Particularly strong, I don't know, but there are few of them which I find exceptional as pieces of music and as transcriptions of that music. Of course, La Serenade, the first piece, could be one of them. Surely El König will be another of them. There is also the Junge Nonne, fantastic piece and very nice transcription, or Mädchens Klage, which is very nice transcriptions, rather in an orchestral manner. Perhaps the main characteristic of Liszt's piano language is that it assimilates cultures which are in a certain way foreign to it. It assimilates vocal music, it assimilates orchestral music, it assimilates organ music. And in that sense, in the time of Liszt, piano got positioned at this central instrument, which was capable to reproduce everything. I mean, the whole music repertoire. And in that sense, these transcriptions are very interesting because they serve as an example of a transcription of vocal music to piano. So, in terms of interpretation, it's necessary to make the piano sing. But also it features certain elements of orchestral writing, since Liszt's arrangements very often, even if they are not made or based on orchestral works, have an orchestral dimension, which is the case in these arrangements of the Lieder. Maybe Mädchens Klage, perhaps the Junge Nonne also in a certain way. Yeah. Well, as in all Liszt music, it's very important to identify important and less important elements of the texture. Since we know it's a very polyphonic texture, which with different layers of music and different layers of very often of embellishments or of some ornamental elements. And what is very important, I think, it's always to find the optimal relation in terms of acoustics of these different layers. This is what gives to the whole image of the piece, to the acoustic image of the piece, a very clear identity. Because if all the layers of the texture are played in the same way, you just get a bunch of noise. Certainly, to play these pieces, of course, it's necessary to know the text, to know the content, and to know what is the piece about. And it's the same if one plays opera transcriptions or opera paraphrases and fantasies and so on. You always have to keep the text in mind, keep in mind the intonation in the melody which fits the text in certain moments, because as we know in the phrases some words are more important, others are less important, and very often the melody follows that, but not always. So these are all things to be taken in consideration when one plays opera or Lied transcription, certainly, yeah. For my own pleasure, yes.
そういう意味ではご自身はやっぱりピアノで歌う方がボイスよりもやっぱりより豊かに表現できる。
Well, I hope so, because I'm not a very good singer. And I hope that I'm a better pianist than I'm a singer. Well, Schubert composed a huge number of songs, as we know, and we know him as a great melodist, first of all. Of course, we know him also as a very good composer of orchestral music, also operatic music, which is not so often, unfortunately, played today. And I think that Liszt, in a certain way, reproduces the image of Schubert, of course, translating it in the language of his own world, his own musical world, I want to say, his own musical aesthetics. But if we are speaking about the two composers, I think that Liszt, in a certain way, in his way, is faithful to Schubert, and he's trying to reproduce these songs in the most faithful way. Yeah, well, the versions which are indicated as my versions are actually combinations of different versions of Liszt. As we know, Liszt composed many of his works in different versions, and also many of his transcriptions or arrangements are written in different versions. Sometimes we know why he was writing new variants, new versions. Sometimes we don't really know, because in terms of pianism and the refinement of pianistic textures, sometimes we find, even in Liszt's earlier versions, very interesting moments which are worth exploring or considering for a performance. So it's not always that the last version is the definitive version. And that's why I thought and I believed that some passages from the previous versions were more interesting. I mean, they don't change, for example, the melodic line. They don't change anything basic in the piece itself, but they maybe change, they present different kinds of, let's say, accompanying textures or displacements through different registers and so on. So this is a kind of fusion of Liszt's version, which does not influence really the work or the identity of the work. The work stays the same, the melody stays the same, the harmony is the same, and all of the other elements are very much are very, very close one to each other. But I opted for some versions and some variants since I found them very interesting. It's what I said. What I recorded is the first version of the Forelle, the first version. But already in the first version, in the second part, Liszt added an Ossia line or an alternative line, which is already, let's say, a second version of the first version. And later on, Liszt published a second version, which is not included in the CD. So it was a part of Liszt's transcribing and arranging practice to publish the main line with a certain text and to publish an Ossia, an alternative line, which you may opt for or not. Because I found it interesting to, since recording is always a permanent document of a certain pianistic act or musical act, I found it interesting to record both, to have them documented. Yeah, as two possibilities which are there for the interpreter to choose. Certainly, you have the narrator, there is the narrator, there is the father, and there is his child. No? And certainly, first of all, these different personages are written in different registers on the piano. So already the way of writing music implicates that there are different, that there is the child and the father and the narrator in the middle. But of course, when you play it with the intonation. Each of these sections, I mean, you play with the intonation which corresponds to each one of them. No? Well, nothing so particular, except that some of the versions which are recorded are actually very rare versions, which were published in the Krantz edition towards the end of the 19th century. And they were very, very difficult to trace. So I found them in the Liststiftung, through the Liststiftung in Weimar, Liszt Foundation. No? In Weimar, and I finally managed to trace them, and they were given to me, sent to me for this occasion of this report. It's very hard to say, because everybody has perhaps its own priorities and its own taste and its own affinity. What I would maybe choose is the Serenade and El König. But this doesn't mean that somebody will not have another favorite. Well, the Serenade, because of the simplicity of its melodic line and the way it's transcribed for piano, and probably also because of the pleasure which it gives to the performer of trying to sing at the piano. And on the other side, the El König, which is an extremely dramatic piece. It's a very strong piece. It's a very moving piece, and as such, I mean, as I said, it's not that other pieces are not moving, but maybe this I find a bit more moving than the rest. I think that Liszt is a very important pianist and composer for all the pianists of our time, and all the pianists also. It was an important figure for all the pianists from the past, you know, which were there after him, mostly those which were after him, but also for the pianists of his own time, as we know. And I think that the key and the reason of this importance of Liszt's figure lies in the fact that he developed the possibilities of the piano in a way which was unprecedented before, in a way that allowed the piano to become really the central instrument of that time, and the piano which developed certain in terms of performance, acoustic effects and writings which were not known before Liszt. So we always see Liszt as the father of modern pianism. For me personally, Liszt was always a very attractive figure since I was a child, practically, and I played a lot of Liszt's music, and I think that what he brought to piano was really a huge revolution in terms of piano technique, in terms of acoustic effects which the piano started to produce after him, and the image generally of the piano as the central instrument capable of playing everything, the whole musical repertoire. I think I was about 11 years old, and I remember I loved Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsodies, and at that age I started to learn many of them, and it was a huge work. I remember I spent one whole summer practically studying four Rhapsodies, and since then I always kept Liszt on the repertoire. I don't know, sincerely, I don't know why exactly these two were appreciated more than my other Liszt albums, which I recorded also for Naxos. This I don't know, but the jury probably has its own opinion about it. I suppose that the Liszt Paganini studies was very interesting and very attractive, since it features the first versions of the Paganini studies, which is a very complex version of studies and with very, you can say, difficult piano textures, difficult in the mechanical sense, just performing sense. And these versions are actually very rarely played. So I think that this was a point which counted for the jury of the Grand Prix. The other CD, I think, features also a rather interesting repertoire, because it features the first version of the Totentanz which is much less known than the second one. It's a version which Busoni discovered about the beginning of the 20th century in Venice. And it features also an arrangement of Liszt's Spanish Rhapsody for piano and orchestra by Busoni. So I suppose that the choice of repertoire counts in both cases as much as does maybe the quality of performance and all these performing aspects. I first think that transcription is it's actually not a genre, it's a phenomenon in music, because there is no unique way, there is no matrice which is used for making transcriptions. Every transcription can be done in a different way if compared to the original. This is the first thing. I believe that it's exactly through transcriptions that the piano and the art of piano got enriched. Because we got a much wider repertoire, we got a much wider, much wider palette of colors in terms of associations. Acoustic associations according, if compared to other instruments, to other to voices, or to even some stage settings, because we very well know that also Liszt's operatic paraphrases also have this stage moment, no? So it's a very dramatic, but also very theatrical music, no? So I think that the transcription is something, the arrangement is something which enriched enormously pianism as an art. And when you say that it's true that there are some pianists which don't approach transcriptions, that's true. And that's very often because transcriptions are regarded as a second-class works, as copies of original works, as works which are not of the same value as original works. But there is actually no point in that view, at least I think so. And there were many musicians who were trying to stress the value of the transcription. Even Busoni, in his own time, he was a great transcriptor and arranger himself. He said and he considered that even an original work is a transcription of an abstract idea. So an abstract idea, when the composer gets it, gets transcribed into a real work, and it can be transcribed for a different instrument, for in a different way, using different techniques, and so on. So in that sense, a transcription of an existing work is not less worth than a transcription of an abstract idea. So actually what Busoni did, he blurred completely the borderline between the original work and the transcription, which is I find very interesting, and point of view which he had actually, and which says that a composer is actually arranging the sounds and the rhythms coming from nature. Completely dissolves the theory which implies that transcription is a second-class work. It's difficult to choose one element. Huh? There are many elements which are important. It's important to try to get the good connection with the music which is performed. The good connection, when I say the good connection, nothing should be automatic. The performance should always sound as if it's made in that moment, even if it's well practiced before. So I think that this is a very important spot. Good connection with the piece, which is performed, of course, means also good connection with the acoustic situation, the real acoustic situation which you have in that particular place when you play. And a certain contact with the public, certain contact where you transmit something and you know it's been received. I think there is nothing more horrible than to play a concert where you transmit something, but you don't know what is who is receiving, if there is anybody receiving what you are trying to transmit. So I think that these elements are what make a concert good and successful, because if the public is a very important element in that. So if there is no contact, no communication with the public, I think that the concert cannot be considered as successful. And exactly this is what makes what give a certain perspective to everything what we saw in this time of COVID, when concert halls were empty and there were musicians playing in empty concert halls. And this is something which is, from my point of view, completely absurd, because if you don't have a destination, you don't have a person to talk to, a person to transmit something, then your performance is they're just for the camera, which can be done also in a studio, and it doesn't need a concert hall. Konnichiwa. In April this year, my new album featuring list transcriptions of Schubert's songs will get released by Naxos in the series of complete piano music. The album features some rather famous songs by Schubert, such as the Serenade, the El König, or the Forelle, which is recorded in this album in two versions. Yeah, the album will be available in streaming and physical version, and I hope that you will enjoy it.